Okay, hopefully you have your endocrine system notes with you. So we'll go over these notes. So you have a blank. The endocrine system is the first blank. Endocrine system, a system of glands which produces chemical messengers to different areas of the body. So we have here a profile of a person here pointing out all the different endocrine glands and their locations around the body. And we're going to talk about several of these through this lecture. So we have endocrine glands, glands which secrete products directly into the bloodstream by way of capillaries. So when they secrete, the capillary beds that are around them, the hormones go directly into the bloodstream and are carried throughout the body. And one example of that is like when you're startled, you immediately are excited, your heart rate goes up, your breathing rate goes up, you're excited. Well, that was adrenaline that was released by your adrenal glands into your bloodstream, and you know how fast that went systemic. So that's how endocrine glands work. They secrete their products, hormones, into the bloodstream, and it goes systemic. Exocrine glands, glands which secrete non-hormonal products into ducts, which empty into an area or onto a surface. So exocrine glands have ducts, tubes that deliver their products somewhere, like sweat glands deliver their products to the surface of your body, to the surface of your skin. Some glands in your digestive tract secrete enzymes and acids into your digestive tract. Salivary glands secrete their secretions by way of ducts into your mouth. Now, there's something called paracrine factors. Paracrine factors are local hormones which only affect the cells of the tissue of origin. Sometimes you may have a little red spot on your surface of your skin, and you see that it only is red in that one spot, not across the surface of your body. The paracrine factors are being secreted in just that area to just the cells in the area. Now you should have a blank here. That's hormones are chemical messengers. So there should be a blank there. Hormones are chemical messengers which are released in one tissue and are transported by way of the blood to the cells they're supposed to affect, and those cells are called target cells. Target cells, target cells. Hormones fall into three groups on the basis of their chemical structure. Amino acid derivatives. Remember, amino acids are the building blocks for proteins. They're not proteins. They are put together to make long chains, which are called proteins. Peptide hormones and lipid derivatives. So number one is amino acid derivatives. These are small molecules similar to amino acids. This includes epinephrine and norepinephrine. Those like adrenaline and noradrenaline. Dopamine, those are catecholamines. The thyroid hormones, those are for your metabolism, are synthesized from the amino acid tyrosine, Tyrosine. And melatonin, synthesized from the amino acid tryptophan, Tryptophan. Number two, peptide hormones. These are chains of amino acids because remember the bond between amino acids is called a peptide bond. These are produced in the rough endoplasmic reticulum. The peptide chains are called prehormones. Prehormones, and must be converted into prohormones prior to their release into the bloodstream. Their lifespan in the bloodstream is approximately 30 minutes. By that time, they will have either affected their target cell, been broken down by the liver and kidneys, or broken down by enzymes in the plasma or interstitial fluid. So they're not meant to be there forever. Number three, lipid derivatives. There are two classes of lipid-based hormones. You've got steroid hormones and eicosanoids. Steroid hormones are structurally similar to cholesterol and are released by both male and female reproductive organs, the adrenal glands and the kidneys. Eicosanoids are small molecules with a 5-carbon ring at one end. So those are all lipid derivatives. So we have A. The blank, the word that goes in the blank is prostaglandins. Prostaglandins, prostaglandins, are produced by most of the tissues of the body and affect local cellular activities. Leukotrienes, leuko is white, are released by leukocytes, which are white blood cells, to promote chemotaxis and mediate inflammation. We'll talk a little bit more about chemotaxis later, but that is where a foreign cell, as they're living off of the materials of your body, they produce waste products. And those waste products we call toxins. And your white blood cells home in on the source of those toxins. And that's what chemotaxis is. C is thromboxanes, and prostaglandins are released by platelets during blood clotting. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the cardiovascular system. A hormone may stimulate the synthesis of an enzyme or a structural protein not already in the cytoplasm by activating appropriate genes in the nucleus. Okay. Increase or decrease the rate of synthesis of a particular enzyme or other protein by changing the rate of transcription or translation. Turn an existing hormone on or off by changing its shape or structure. Now that probably should be an existing enzyme. So let's look at a little picture that's in your PowerPoints here. It's this one right here. And you see that when a hormone is released into the bloodstream, the one on the left, here's your blood vessel, and it says first messenger, and there's your hormone. The little thing looks like a little skateboard. And it's delivered by the bloodstream to the cells. Now the cells, like it says here, must have the correct receptor site in order for a hormone to affect them. Hormone receptors may be found on the cell membrane and inside of the cell. So on this one, you see here's the receptor on the left, this little green thing here. That's the receptor for the hormone that's in the membrane. Well, the picture on the right, you see that the receptors are inside in the cytoplasm, on the mitochondrion, or actually inside of the nucleus. So those hormones on the right are lipid soluble. They can go through the membrane. The ones on the left are not lipid soluble. Hormone receptors may be found on the cell membrane, and there they are there, and inside the cell, and there they are on the right, inside the cell. If a hormone is not lipid soluble, it can't deliver its message directly to the cell, the first messenger. First messenger goes in that blank, but it can send its message by way of a secondary messenger. The hormone finds its receptor site on the surface membrane of the cell. There it is, there's a receptor, and it binds as the first messenger. The binding causes a second messenger to be formed within the cell. You see that the binding, it says, activates adenylate cyclase, which converts ATP to cyclic AMP, and the cyclic AMP acts as the secondary messenger, which then will function as an enzyme activator, inhibitor, or cofactor in order to alter the metabolic activity of the cell. And you see that alterations in enzyme activity, it most likely would have phosphorylated the enzyme, added a phosphate to it. There's your transduction pathway, that arrow, and here's your cellular response. So the binding of a few hormone molecules, which in turn generates thousands of secondary messengers within the cell, is called amplification. AMPLIFICATION. Membrane proteins called G proteins allow a link to be formed between the first messenger and the formation of its secondary messenger. From general biology, if you look on this left picture, when the hormone bound to the receptor, G proteins are involved. GTP is attached to the G protein, and it has a job, and in this case, it activates the adenylate cyclase to break down ATP to cyclic AMP. And then its job is done. It's broken back down, and GTP is inactive again. But once that happens, the enzyme is phosphorylated, and it starts the transduction pathway for a cellular response. Okay, and the same thing will happen over here, except in this case, the hormone binds to a receptor that's inside of the cell. There's not going to be a secondary messenger in that case. The binding is going to occur, and that'll cause something to happen. And you see that it can cause, over here on the left, alteration in structural proteins or enzyme activity. It can change the rate of transcription or translation. It can increase the rate of ATP synthesis in the mitochondrion. So it has a lot of intracellular potentials that go on in there. Let's look at the pituitary gland just real briefly here. The new word for pituitary is hypophysis. 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 Hypo means below, and physis means growth. And you can see on this picture that it is hanging down below the brain. So it is a below growth. It says an endocrine gland located in the hypophysial fossa of the sella turcica. If you remember that from the bones, you see there's the hypophysial fossa right here. It's not labeled, but it's this little shallow cup-like structure. Right there, hypophysial fossa. And hangs from a hypothalamus by a stalk right here called the infundibulum. infundibulum. This gland can be divided into the anterior pituitary, which you can see here, anterior pituitary, or the adenohypophysis, ADENOHYPOPHYSIS. Adeno means glandular, and hypophysis means below growth. So this is the glandular portion of the hypophysis, the adenohypophysis, which releases 7 hormones. And then the posterior pituitary, or posterior hypophysis, is called the neurohypophysis. NEUROHYPOPHYSIS is the neuro portion, the nervous portion, nervous growth, which releases 2 hormones. They're not produced or secreted there, they're stored there, and they're released from there, whereas the anterior lobe, they're produced and stored there and released from the anterior lobe, the adenohypophysis. All of these hormones bind to membrane receptors and use cyclic AMP as a secondary messenger. The anterior lobe is fed by the superior hypophysial artery. So we'll look at the picture here, and there's a mistake on this picture. They took off the word superior off of this one right here. That is the superior hypophysial artery, and here's the inferior down below. So they don't distinguish the two on this picture. The top one is the superior. So this artery delivers regulating factors from the hypothalamus. It's going to be up here, from the hypothalamus, to the anterior lobe, where a plexus is formed and the regulating factors cause the release of the 7 hormones. So you can see that this superior hypophysial artery is coming by. There's a capillary bed here that's going to pick up these regulating hormones. There's 2 of them we'll talk about, and bring them down to the anterior lobe. So this blood supply picks them up and takes them to the anterior lobe, and then they can be released into the hormones can be released directly into the bloodstream. The neurohypophysis does not have anything that's picked up from the hypothalamus here by way of a capillary bed. There are 2 regulatory classes of hormones: releasing hormones, that's RELEASING, which are abbreviated RH, which stimulate synthesis and secretion of 1 or more hormones at the anterior pituitary. So The releasing hormones are going to be picked up by the hypothalamus in this capillary bed and taken down to the anterior lobe to release a particular hormone. And inhibiting hormone, IH, which prevents the synthesis and secretion of hormones from the anterior pituitary. So the other regulating factor, an inhibiting hormone, can be picked up here by the hypothalamus and sent down to the anterior lobe to say do not release or stop releasing that particular hormone. So let's look back at the anterior pituitary or the adenohypophysis and see what can be released. We have several. The first one here, number 1, is thyroid stimulating hormone. And there it is, the second one down, thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH is the abbreviation for that. Targets the thyroid gland, that's why it's called thyroid stimulating hormone, and triggers the release of thyroid hormones. And there it is, stimulates the thyroid gland to secrete its hormones. There's 2 in particular we'll talk about. That should be TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, is released in response to thyroid hormone releasing hormone, TRH, from the hypothalamus. So remember, the regulating factor is going to be a releasing factor. It's going to tell the anterior lobe to release thyroid stimulating hormone. As the levels of thyroid hormones increase, the levels of thyroid stimulating hormone and thyroid releasing hormone decline. Thyroid stimulating hormone regulates the metabolic rate of the body. That's why your thyroid is so important. It's involved in cellular metabolism. The thyroid gland is located on top of the larynx. So let's look back up here at this picture right here. And there's the thyroid gland. Right here. And it kind of is covering the larynx a little bit there. Looks like a little butterfly. On top of the larynx and below the cricoid cartilage. There's the cricoid cartilage. Here's the thyroid cartilage and the cricoid cartilage. It's right below that on your larynx, your voice box. And you can see where it is on this person here. The thyroid gland, you have a blank there. Follicular cells, FOLLICULAR, cells from the walls of the thyroid follicles. Well, here's a thyroid follicle. There's several of them on this picture. They're circles, and you see that they're outlined by the cuboidal cells here, and they have it labeled thyroid follicle, and then to the right, cuboidal epithelium of the follicle. Those are called follicular cells. All those cuboidal cells are follicular cells. The follicular cells combine iodine with the amino acid tyrosine, TYROSINE, to form the thyroid hormones thyroxine, which is T4, and triiodothyronine, which is T3. These hormones bind to a protein called thyroglobulin, THYROGLOBULIN, to form a stable hormone complex of thyroglobulin thyroid hormone. Okay, it's going to be stable inside of this thyroid follicle here. When the thyroid hormones are released into the blood, they are stabilized once again by binding with a protein called thyroxine binding globulin, TBG. This is now called protein-bound iodine, PBI. Now, thyroid hormones are not relatively stable. That's why they have to be bound in the follicle. And that's why they have to be bound to something as they're transported through the bloodstream. Thyroid binding globulin is lipid soluble, a means of transport across cell membranes, and provides a means of stability for the thyroid hormones. Inside the cell, they bind to receptors. So we were seeing earlier on this picture here that they're going to be lipid soluble. There's thyroid hormones right there. So they've been stabilized. Bind to receptors in the cell, receptors on the surface of the mitochondria. They can bind there. And receptors in the cytoplasm. You can bind here, but they're also binding in the nucleus there. Another type of cell called parafollicular cells, and we can't really see those on this picture. let's see, unless they point, yeah, there it is, a C cell. They used to call them C cells because they produce calcitonin. So the other type of the other name for this is parafollicular. Parafollicular cells, or C cells, are larger than follicular cells and produce the hormone calcitonin. CALCITONIN. There's abbreviation CT. Calcitonin stimulates osteoblasts, those are bone builders, to store excess calcium from the blood into the bones. It also inhibits osteoclasts, the bone breakers, from breaking down bone to release calcium into the blood. Now you see these are called parafollicular cells because they parallel the follicular cells. They're on the outside of the follicle. Okay, the next one, adrenocorticotropic hormone, down here, next to the last. Adrenocorticotropic hormone stimulates the release of steroid hormones from the adrenal cortex. Okay, so there it is. Adrenocorticotropic hormone stimulates adrenal cortex to secrete glucocorticoids. Okay, specifically target cells which produce glucocorticoids. GLUCOCORTICOIDS. This is going to be from a zone that we're going to look at in just a minute called the zona fasciculata. This hormone promotes normal metabolism. That's going to be mostly carbohydrates, but also lipids and proteins. Is an anti-inflammatory, works to reduce stress, and raises glucose levels to make the body more alert. This is one reason that you get kind of jittery when you're trying to overcome stress. You get a little bit too much glucose in your system, but your body's trying to help you fight off that stress. Adrenocorticotropic hormone release occurs under stimulation of corticotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. All right. Now up here on the left, there's a blank that should be there. It says regulates activities of the male and female sex organs. There's a blank that should be out to the side called gonadotrophs right here. GONADOTROPHS. Gonadotrophs are going to affect the gonads, the ovaries, and the testes. So that should be gonadotropins, regulates activities of the male and female sex organs. And those are going to be 3 and 4 on your list here. Number 3, FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone stimulates growth of the follicles in the female's ovary to mature, as well as an increase in estrogen, and stimulates sperm production in males. So the follicles that they're talking about here are the eggs and the sperm. So that hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, helps females' eggs to develop for ovulation and helps males produce sperm. The second one, number 4, is luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone, LUTEINIZING hormone, along with estrogen, stimulates the ovaries to release the ovum. Luteinizing hormone is given credit for ovulation. When it peaks, ovulation occurs and the egg is usually released from the ovary. It's called ovulation. In males, it stimulates the interstitial endocrinocytes to secrete testosterone. TESTOSTERONE. And we will see the interstitial endocrinocytes in just a few minutes. Estrogen and testosterone are examples of hormones called androgens. ANDROGENS. Now, number 5 is prolactin. PROLACTIN. That's a conjunction of 2 words, promote lactation. It says works with several other hormones to stimulate mammary gland development and promote milk secretion by the mammary glands. During the menstrual cycle, prolactin inhibiting factor inhibits the release of prolactin from the anterior pituitary. Because if a female is having a menstrual cycle, she is not pregnant, and she does not need to have the mammary glands developing to produce milk for offspring, because she's not going to have any offspring. She's not pregnant. Prolactin levels rise during pregnancy to promote milk production. So when a female is pregnant, prolactin is released to start getting the mammary glands ready to nurse the offspring. After delivery, prolactin levels fall, but will rise again during nursing. So nursing is going to stimulate the production of, or the release of, prolactin from the anterior pituitary, from the adenohypophysis. Number six is called growth hormone, also called somatotropin. SOMATROPIN. The soma means body, so it's going to stimulate body growth. And a lot of times we'll call this human growth hormone, HGH. Stimulates cell growth and replication by accelerating the rate of protein synthesis. This has to do with increase in muscle and bone mass. And this is one reason athletes get in trouble for taking this hormone, because it's not natural to have excess levels of human growth hormone. If you have excessive levels, then you are increasing your body's ability to produce something that you would not normally produce, and you have a competitive advantage over the other people in that sport. Number 7, well, let's just see, let's continue this. Its major effect is growth of bone and muscle and fat catabolism. The breakdown of fat supplies the energy needed for bone and muscle growth. High glucose levels stimulate the hypothalamus to secrete growth hormone inhibiting factor, which inhibits growth hormone releasing factor, and thus the release of growth hormone. So there's a way of controlling the levels of this growth hormone. Number 7 is melanocyte stimulating hormone, MELANOCYTE, stimulating hormone, MSH, stimulates the skin to produce melanin. This is involved in your skin tone, whether you have light skin tone or a darker skin tone. This hormone here stimulates the cells to produce the amount of hormone that you're supposed to have. Now let's look at the posterior pituitary. Remember the neurohypophysis, the one on the back side. The hypothalamus contains specialized neurons called neurosecretory cells. And we're going to look at those on this picture and the next one. Fibers or bundles of axons leave these cells in the hypothalamus to form the hypothalamic hypophysial tract. And they call it something else here, supraoptico-hypophysial tract here. It's the same thing, which terminates in blood capillaries in the neurohypophysis. I think we have some over here, this picture here. Here's the capillaries in the neurohypophysis. NEUROHYPOPHYSIS. There are 2 areas of neurosecretory cells, and you can see them better on this other picture, just more specific. The supraoptic nucleus, which is above the optic chiasma, supraoptic, above the optic nerve, and the paraventricular nucleus. Paraventricular is kind of parallels, it's right around the third ventricle, PARAVENTRICULAR nucleus. All right. So, number 1, antidiuretic hormone is secreted by the supraoptic nucleus of the hypothalamus. Antidiuretic, ANTIDIURETIC. Second word is just hormone. And antidiuretic, ANTIDIURETIC, is any chemical which prevents excessive urine production. Its main effect is to conserve water by affecting the distal convoluted tubules of the kidneys so that water is reabsorbed. So ADH causes water reabsorption. You don't lose it to form urine. You lose some, but not all of it. It can also cause vasoconstriction of arterioles, that's the closing down or the reduction of blood flow, and an increase in blood pressure. So blood can't go to your extremities, it has to stay in your main system, and it can increase your blood pressure. Osmoreceptors, OSMORECEPTORS, osmose water, right? In the hypothalamus monitor ion levels of water and will stimulate the supraoptic nucleus to produce ADH. If you need to absorb more water, ADH is going to be secreted and you will not lose as much water in your urine. It'll be reclaimed for your systemic circulation and your blood pressure. This ADH is delivered to the kidneys by way of the blood. Number 2, oxytocin. Oxytocin, OXYTOCIN, is secreted by the paraventricular nucleus. That's the one on top here, which is close to the third ventricle. By the paraventricular nucleus of the hypothalamus. It causes contraction of myoepithelial cells in the mammary glands for ejection of milk. EJECTION, of milk, ejection. It also inhibits prolactin inhibiting factor, therefore promoting prolactin secretion. Another function of oxytocin is that it causes uterine contractions to occur during childbirth. So the uterine contraction is a stimulus that causes the release of oxytocin. The release of oxytocin causes uterine contraction. It's kind of a positive feedback loop there. Secretion plus ejection. This is secretion of milk plus ejection, which is caused by oxytocin. Secretion by prolactin, ejection by oxytocin equals lactation. LACTATION. Now, the thymus. The thymus is a little bit hard to see. It's got it right here. It's going to be behind well, let's just look at the picture. Behind the sternum and between the lungs. So they have it shown out here. This is really good. Between the lungs, and they don't show the sternum though. The sternum is up here in the front. It's your breastbone, right, the center of your chest. So it's behind that and between your lungs. And there it is. It's most active in the fetus and young children. It produces T cells, which are named after thymus, the T, lymphocytes for viral immunity. And it degenerates in adults. It becomes less active in adults. This is very active in children because they don't have an immune system. And they have to build up antibodies against infections. And so these T cells are pretty active in attacking foreign cells, especially like for viruses. You build up your immunity. The next is the adrenal glands. So you look on top of the kidneys there, and there's the adrenal glands. These glands are located on top of the kidneys. They have a very good blood supply. So you can see where they are on that. And here's another picture. Here's a kidney, and there's the adrenal gland. They also call them suprarenal glands. That's the adrenal glands. There are two main areas. The cortex. Cortex means outer covering or bark. It's the cortex, C-O-R-T-E-X. And the medulla, M-E-D-U-L-L-A, which means the center, the marrow cavity or the center of an organ. The cortex contains 3 zones of cells, and the zones are shown here, but what's shown is what they secrete. So let's look at the first one, the zona glomerulosa, G-L-O-M-E-R-U-L-O-S-A. The word glomer means ball. And it's kind of hard to see on here, but this dark zone here has balls of cells. They're usually grouped into 3s and 4s. And they look like little balls. And so it's the zone of balls. Produces mineralocorticoids, and they've got it listed right here on the picture. Lipid-soluble hormones, which act on kidneys to control the amount of electrolytes in your body. Aldosterone is the major mineralocorticoid, and that's the one that we'll look at the most when we get to electrolytes. The next zone, this light zone here, is the zona fasciculata. Fasciculata produces glucocorticoids. And there's the word, glucocorticoids. Lipid-soluble hormones which reduce stress, raise glucose levels, promote normal metabolism, and act as anti-inflammatories. Okay, going to get you kind of wired up, a lot of sugar. And then the third zone down here is a little bit darker. Zona reticularis, RETICULARIS. Reticular implies like a network, and these are just stained a little bit darker here. Produce androgens, which are the gonadocorticoids, or sex hormones. The male androgens testosterone, and females produce estrogen. The adrenal medulla is composed of chromaffin cells, which produce epinephrine. So here's the medulla down here. It's a little bit different shade here. Epinephrine, EPINEPHRINE, that's what we call adrenaline, and norepinephrine, or noradrenaline. These hormones function in raising blood pressure, increasing oxygen consumption, increased carbon dioxide production, increased blood glucose levels, and increased rate of digestion, or decreases the rate of digestion. So those are the effects that adrenaline has. It's going to raise the blood pressure because your heart's going to beat faster, increase oxygen consumption because you're going to be breathing faster, your cells are going to need this oxygen, increase carbon dioxide production because as the metabolism increases, more carbon dioxide is produced as a waste gas, increase blood glucose levels because the epinephrine or adrenaline is going to be involved in the breakdown of glycogen, and decreased rate of digestion. You don't need blood going to your digestive tract when you're in a fight or flight situation. Adrenaline is going to be released when you're startled. It's going to be released a lot when you're startled, and it gears you up. And so you don't need to be digesting that hamburger. You need to be diverting that blood flow to your muscles, your brain, for the fight or flight. Kidneys. Well, the kidneys themselves release 3 hormones. Number 1 is calcitrol, CALCITROL. It's a steroid hormone released in response to the presence of parathyroid hormone. The best known function of calcitrol is the stimulation of calcium and phosphate absorption along the digestive tract. So calcitrol helps you to absorb calcium and phosphates from your diet. Number 2, erythropoietin, ERYTHROPOIETIN. Erythro has to do with red, like red blood cells, is a peptide hormone released by the kidneys in response to low oxygen levels in the blood. So the kidneys are monitoring your oxygen levels also. Erythropoietin stimulates the production of red blood cells by the bone marrow. More cells means a better oxygen carrying capacity. Number 3 is renin, RENIN. It's released by the kidneys in response to low blood flow or blood pressure. Once in the blood, renin converts the inactive protein or plasma protein called angiotensinogen. Whenever you see the O-gen on the end of a word like this, it's an inactive precursor molecule. It hasn't been activated yet. So converts an inactive plasma protein called angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. This is then converted in the lungs to angiotensin 2, which is an active hormone. And the effects are increased aldosterone production for electrolyte and water conservation by the kidneys, stimulates ADH secretion to conserve water in the kidneys, and stimulates thirst to promote fluid consumption. That's when you get that dry feeling in your mouth and you want something to drink. Your water levels are a little bit low. Then we have the heart. There are endocrine glands in the atria of the heart. The atria are the top chambers, the two top chambers of the heart, which receive blood into the heart. They release atrial natriuretic peptide, AMP, which promotes the loss of sodium and water at the kidneys, suppresses thirst, and inhibits secretion of ADH and aldosterone. Wow, so it promotes the loss of sodium and water. Retention of sodium helps you to retain water, so it's going to cause both of those to be lost at the kidneys. Suppresses thirst, you're not thirsty, and inhibits the secretion of ADH and aldosterone, which we're going to be involved in water reabsorption. This would result in lowering the blood pressure. The next one is the pancreas, and you can see that the pancreas is here right in the what's called the duodenal loop, right under the stomach, and there's the pancreas. Organ has both endocrine and exocrine functions. The endocrine functions deal with the secretion of hormones to control glucose levels in the blood. So we're going to look over here at the pancreas. Here it is, and there it is. There's that duodenal loop coming off the stomach, and here is the pancreas here. And here's a blow-up of a particular area inside of the pancreas, and we're going to look at that. The function deals with the secretion of hormones to control glucose levels in the blood. There are collections of cells called pancreatic isles, and that's what this is here, this ball of cells. And there are a whole bunch of little balls of cells in the tissue called pancreatic isles, P-A-N-C-R-E-A-T-I-C. Second word, I-S-L-E-T. That's French, it's isles. Or isles of Langerhans, that's an old term, which contain three types of cells which monitor blood glucose levels. So there's three different types of cells inside of here we're going to be interested in. This is the endocrine part of the pancreas, these little balls, these pancreatic isles. The first one is alpha cells, ALPHA cells. Secrete the hormone glucagon, G-L-U-C-A-G-O-N, which converts glycogen to glucose when blood glucose levels are low. So you're going to have glycogen, and glucagon is going to convert glycogen into glucose that the body can use. Next blank is beta, B-E-T-A. Beta cells secrete the hormone insulin, I-N-S-U-L-I-N, which converts glucose into glycogen, just the opposite. So you would have glucose, and then an arrow with insulin over it, converted it back to glycogen, a polymer of glucose. So it's going to store glucose. When the blood glucose levels are too high, it makes the cell membranes become more permeable to glucose, so it can be metabolized. Insulin allows glucose to get into the cells easier, and so your glucose levels won't build up in your bloodstream. Glucose-dependent diabetics have a problem in that their cells can't take in glucose because these beta cells are dead or in very low numbers, and very little insulin is produced, and so the insulin can't help the cell get glucose into the cell. The transport protein works a lot slower without insulin. This newly formed glycogen is stored in the liver. Okay. So let's read that again. Beta cells secrete the hormone insulin, which converts glucose to glycogen when the blood glucose levels are too high, and makes the cell membranes become more permeable to glucose so it can be metabolized, so it can get inside the cell quicker. This newly formed glycogen is stored in the liver, so the glycogen is going to be stored in the liver. The third blank is delta, D-E-L-T-A. Cells regulate the activity of alpha and beta cells, so it kind of controls alpha and beta cells, keeps them in check. Now, we have the ovaries. So let's look at another slide. Here's the ovaries here, but let's look at a slide that has the ovaries on it, which is going to be right here. There it is. These glands produce estrogens and progesterones. Estrogen, E-S-T-R-O-G-E-N, and progesterone, P-R-O-G-E-S-T-E-R-O-N-E, which work to develop and maintain the female's secondary sex characteristics. Now, the estrogen and progesterones are going to be produced by these cells right here called follicular cells. Okay, these cells that are being built up and surround the egg and are in this follicle here, these are what are secreting the hormones, the female's hormones, estrogen and progesterone. They also produce relaxin, R-E-L-A-X-I-N, a hormone which softens the cartilage of the pubis symphysis. Now that's going to happen to make the birth canal shift a little bit when delivery of a baby is occurring. So it's not just a stiff, solid structure. It can be moved around as the baby's coming out. So the ovaries, here's an ovary, it's full of eggs, and this is just showing the development of all these little primary follicles. It just shows the development step by step instead of showing 20 different pictures. So the follicular cells here are going to produce the hormones we're talking about, estrogen and progesterone, as well as relaxin produced by the ovaries. The testes, and here is the male, here's a testicle, one right here. These glands produce testosterone, T-E-S-T-O-S-T-E-R-O-N-E, which stimulates the development and maintenance of the male's secondary sex characteristics, the male's reproductive organs, facial hair for beards, more musculature, a little bit stronger bones, deeper voice, that kind of stuff. And you can see that here are the cells right here that we're going to talk about. The testosterone is produced by these cells called interstitial cells here. Interstitial cells. These tubules here that have been cut, these are seminiferous tubules, and there's the sperm are being produced, and they'll slough off in the center here. So the seminiferous tubules produce sperm, and these interstitial cells here, it means between the tissues, this is where testosterone is produced right there. Now the last one we'll talk about, the pineal gland, which you can see right up here. If you remember from the brain where it is, it's between the two superior colliculi, right above them. This gland contains pinealocytes, pineal cells, which synthesize melatonin, M-E-L-A-T-O-N-I-N, from the neurotransmitter serotonin. Melatonin is an antioxidant which protects the central nervous system neurons from free radicals and is involved in our circadian rhythm, C-I-R-C-A-D-I-A-N. The circadian rhythm is your internal clock. It lets you know, daytime, nighttime. It's involved in your awake and sleep cycles. And that's the end of this lecture.